Cast from CBS Sports.
High drive, center field, hit the wall, grand slam. This is magnificent.
Got a fantasy question? Email fantasybaseball@cbsi.com. Get ready to win your league.
Where fantasy becomes reality.
Now here's Frank, Scott, Chris, and Adam.
Welcome into our 2022 position previews and welcome to Fantasy Baseball today on Monday, February 7th. I am Frank Stampfl, joined by Scott White and Chris Towers, and we'll be breaking down the best position of all today, catcher. That's right, overall strategy at the position. We've got some ADP review, sleepers, breakouts, and busts, our favorites to draft, and much more. What is up, Scotty? What are your overall thoughts on the catcher position this year? Do you think that you need one of the consensus top 6 catchers this season? Salvador Perez, JT Realmuto, Will Smith, Grandal, Daulton Varsho, Willson Contreras. That is a consensus top 6 in our rankings and an ADP.
No, you never need a top catcher. However, I will say that this is the first year I'm trying to remember when the last time was that I was eager, like putting a heavy emphasis on drafting the number 1 catcher like I am this year. It's been a long time. I'm trying to remember. Was it Joe Mauer? Was it like the heyday of Victor Martinez? I don't remember who it was, but we're talking a long time ago.
All right. Well, Chris is here as well. Chris, what is your overall strategy in a 1-catcher league versus a 2-catcher league? For those who might not be aware, usually you start 1 catcher in a head-to-head league, whether it's head-to-head points or head-to-head categories, and you start 2 catchers in the traditional 5x5 roto format. Chris, how do those 2 different formats vary for you?
I think I'm more likely to pay the premium for the good catchers in a 1-catcher league than I am a 2-catcher league, because there are fewer lineup spots in general. I mean, this is specifically talking about head-to-head versus roto, and this is something we talked about last week. But when there are fewer lineup spots in general, there's more of an onus on getting difference makers at as many positions as possible. You're not going to be able to do it at every position, but the difference between Salvador Perez and Keibert Ruiz, who is number 6 in ADP?
I believe 8th in ADP.
Okay. The difference between those 2 guys is much, much larger when you've only got 9 other lineup spots as opposed to 13 or 12, I guess. So I'm more likely to pay the premium in a 1-catcher league. In a 2-catcher league, we did a roto draft not long ago where I waited until the 19th round, I believe, and ended up with Mitch Garver and Joey Bart. So I'm perfectly happy to wait when it comes to 2-catcher leagues.
All right. Scott, do you agree the same? Do you want a better catcher in a 1-catcher league versus a 2-catcher league?
Yeah. I mean, the last half decade or so, right, JT Realmuto has been the consensus number 1 catcher, and I don't ever remember drafting him in a 2-catcher league, but there have been several times where I've taken him in a 1-catcher league for exactly the reason Chris said. Like, you got to make every lineup spot count in a way you don't have to in a lineup so large that it allows for 2 catchers.
All right. Yeah. Look, I think in a daily league in particular, more often than not, that's a head-to-head categories league. I want to talk about just overall catcher outlook and strategy discussion before we jump into ADP. Chris, what do you think about the possibility of playing or I guess having a catcher tandem on your fantasy team in a daily lineup league where you can play, I don't know, for example, the Blue Jays catchers or the Rays catchers or the Tigers? Those are like the top tandems that stand out to me. The Brewers and the Padres, I guess, as well. But it feels like we've got more questions about that in recent years than we have ever before. People talking about potentially using catcher tandems in daily lineup leagues. What do you think about that possibility?
I think it's too cute by at least half, if not more. Just because there aren't that many good catcher tandems. I mean, you you go by team last season. Would you like to know how many teams had a 100 weighted runs created plus or better from their catchers in 2021?
3.
You were too pessimistic. It was 7.
Okay.
That includes Milwaukee, Washington, Kansas City, the Dodgers, the Giants, the Rays, and the White Sox. So I suppose you could get away with it if the Rays catchers have as good a season in 2022 as they did in 2021.
Omar Minaya and Manny Pena?
Apparently so.
Omar
Narvaez.
Omar Minaya. yeah, Narvaez. Thank you.
Yeah, that's weird. Yeah, they were both right around league average, and then their backups had like 50 good plate appearances. So I guess, I don't know.
Yeah.
They were right at 100.
The thing is, like, just why? Why?
And even
you'll get more at bats from drafting another team's number 1 than a team's number 2.
Well, and even like Milwaukee's combo, they hit 244 with 26 homers and 700 plate appearances.
Yeah.
Is that really worth 2 roster spots? Like you're better off. It's probably you're better off just being the person who drafts Salvador Perez than using 2 roster spots on catchers.
Yeah.
Unless you play in a 10-man bench or something. It's just not worth it.
I've never done it, but we've received questions about it in the past. So someone's trying to do it out there. But for the most part, unless you play in like a super deep league, it probably doesn't make sense to do that. Scott, have you thought about how the NLDH is going to affect catchers this year? Specifically, obviously catchers in the National League that are usable offensively. Obviously, I mean, we saw back in 2020, the shortened season, Willson Contreras saw 32% of his plate appearances at designated hitter. JT Realmuto saw 18%. Travis d'Arnaud saw 15% at DH. So we could see more plate appearances for Realmuto, Will Smith, Daulton Varsho. Obviously, he'll play outfield as well, but Willson Contreras, Tyler Stephenson, Travis d'Arnaud. Have you factored that into your rankings and maybe even your strategy when it comes to the position?
I mean, a little bit, not with a lot of specifics. I know that is a big reason why a lot of people are elevating Will Smith ahead of JT Realmuto, and I've heard of some people even ranking Will Smith number 1 at the position, which I don't really see any justification to rank anybody but Salvador Perez personally. But it seems like people are really counting on that, and when they did have the DH spot last year, the Dodgers did often start Smith there, but presumably they're going to construct their roster a little differently. Depends kind of how much time they'll have to construct the rest of their roster, of course. I don't want to count on, I don't want to count on it necessarily because we haven't really seen it put into practice yet.
Will Smith started as many games at DH in 2021 as he did in 2020. 3. So at least based on how they used him in 2020, that was not a big priority for them. Now, that being said, Scott, you say there's no reason to believe Will Smith should be number 1. I agree. He shouldn't be number 1. But, if he played if he got to 600 plate appearances, his 162 game average for his career is 611 plate appearances, 35 homers, 105 RBI, 91 runs, 262 average. That wouldn't be better than Salvador Perez was last year, but
yeah,
it's.
But you said
awesome.
If he gets to 600 plate appearances,
yeah, it's asking a lot. Like there have not been very few American League catchers get to 600 plate appearances.
Right.
Salvador Perez is kind of a unicorn in that regard.
Yeah, even if Will Smith, I was looking at this earlier, even if he gets to 550 plate appearances, that probably puts him on pace for 30 home runs over the course of the season. So, I mean, that would mean him doing something he hasn't done before last year, 130 games, 501 plate appearances for him. But with the DH, yeah, I mean, maybe he can see a 5 to 10% increase in playing time. I don't think that is outside the realm of possibility for the gifted offensive catchers in the National League. Let's jump into ADP here, and we'll start with the consensus top 6, as I mentioned. And we're using Fantasy Pros ADP, which takes a combination of different outlets right now. And based on that ADP, Salvador Perez is a 3rd-round pick with an ADP of 33 overall. He had a historic 2021 last year. He set the single-season home run record by a catcher-eligible player with 48 home runs. He led baseball with 121 RBI. His 665 plate appearances were most by a catcher in a single season since Victor Martinez had 672 back in 2009. Scott, obviously you've already referenced that you are in on drafting Salvador Perez, and even though his ADP is in the 3rd round, our most recent mock drafts, he's gone 44th and 45th overall. So maybe he even slips a little bit into that 4th round. I know a lot of people are going to bring up regression, Scott, and the fact that he's not going to do what he did again last year. That's perfectly fine. And I think, responsibly, that's what we should expect. The fact that he is.
Yeah, I mean, anytime somebody does something historic like that, you shouldn't count on history, record-shattering performances being repeated. I think that stands to reason. But he was a distant number 1 among catchers in 2020 as well. And we all were like, whatever, 60-game season. We know who Salvador Perez is. He's like a 240 hitting guy with pretty good power. And then he was, again, far and away the best player at the position. And when I say he was the best player at the position, I'm talking about like by a mile. There was no singular advantage at any position bigger than Salvador Perez's advantage at the catcher position. And I would still expect him to be a pretty significant number of 1, even if you just give him 2/3 of last year's home runs and RBI. There hasn't been a catcher. I've said this on a number of podcasts, but I should in the catcher preview as well. There hasn't been a catcher to lead the majors in home runs and RBI since Johnny Bench. And Johnny Bench is the only other catcher before Salvador Perez last year to do that. So, I mean, this is the kind of difference maker you hope to find at any position. And I'm not going to ignore it just because it happens to be at a position we normally think of as volatile. I don't know that I draft him at his ADP very often. 33rd, you said. That's, getting late in round 3 in a 12-team league, maybe. But I've said before, anytime he's available in round 4, I don't care what else is going on with my team, I'm probably going to take Salvador Perez. Yeah,
just how good was Salvador Perez last year? Scott, you referenced it a little bit. 9th overall in Roto. The next closest catcher was Will Smith, who finished 102nd in that format. Salvador Perez had 504 fantasy points based on CBS's point scoring system. Will Smith was the next closest with 383.5. So over a 100-point difference there between them.
And I'll add the gap between Will Smith at number 2 and Yasmani Grandal or Salvador Perez at number 1 was larger than the gap between Will Smith at number 2 and Tyler Stephenson at number 12.
Wow.
Yeah.
That is insane. Yeah, I mean, it paints the picture of just how good Salvador Perez was last season. And even if you mentioned, Scott, 2/3, I did, 75% of his production from last year still gives him 36 homers, 66 runs scored, 90 RBI. And if he hits 260 plus, I would put that number up against any other catcher stat line and say that it's most likely going to be the number 1 catcher this upcoming season.
Yeah, and we should mention the playing time advantage too. I mean, he started, I think, 40 games at DH. So we know how the Royals are gonna handle their DH spot with Salvador Perez. They're gonna stick him there basically anytime they don't want him catching, and he's
I think he played like 30 games at DH last season.
Yeah, and you can't count on most catchers playing even 3/4 of the maybe 3/4 of the time is what you hope for from a catcher. So that that beyond just what he actually does, that playing time advantage is huge. That's going to give him. It's going to make it virtually impossible for him to finish out of the top 5, even if he stinks it up.
I would say this is probably the position, maybe third base. It's either third base or catcher are the only positions where I think you would at least consider taking the top player versus the field to finish number 1 this year. Which is, given how much we know things vary from year to year and how unpredictable these things tend to be, that's saying an awful lot. You would take the field over the number 1 player everywhere, except maybe catcher and third base.
Scott, last point here on Salvador Perez. Any concern over MJ Melendez, one of the top catcher prospects in the game, one of the top prospects for the Royals? It seems like he's coming soon. I don't know what that looks like. Does he DH? Does he play catcher? Does Salvador Perez DH? I don't know, but is there any concern for you when it comes to that?
I don't think when it comes to Salvador Perez, no. I mean, if he stinks it up, I guess that's possible. That it's not just MJ Melendez, by the way. It's Nick Pratto on the verge of breaking in. It's Vinny Pasquantino. They could all three be up this year, and between first base, catcher, and DH, the Royals, they might have a bit of a headache there. But I suspect Salvador Perez is not going to be. More likely they'd lose playing time to each other than Salvador Perez losing playing time to any of them.
I think there have been at least two different Cardinals prospects. I know Carson Kelly was one. I think there was another one where we were like, it might be time for Yadier Molina to start losing playing time. Maybe they'll move on, and it just never happened. Obviously, that doesn't mean that the same thing's going to happen in KC, but the Royals also seem to view Salvador Perez in the same light that the Cardinals view Yadier Molina. So I would be stunned if he lost significant,
like face of the franchise, like heart of the franchise. Kind of
like
stuff.
One of the best players in franchise history. Whether that's true or not, that's how they view him.
All right, let's move on to JT Realmuto, the second catcher off the board, going more than 2 rounds later than Salvador Perez. We're not really used to this. 57.7 is the ADP, his lowest draft cost since 2018 for JT Realmuto. Last year, finished with a 263 batting average, 17 home runs, 13 steals. So still giving you modest power, but a good amount of speed at this position. Again, out of position steals. It's very valuable. And that's often why we're looking at drafting JT Realmuto as often as we are, not just in Roto, but for points leagues, because he plays as much as he does. He provides a lot of volume as well. Chris, there are some things that are adding up here. I mean, he's getting a little bit older. He's missed some time with injury. The ground ball rate starting to creep up there for JT Realmuto, but it's his lowest cost now. So can you see yourself maybe investing in the 6th round in a 12-team league in JT Realmuto?
I could potentially see it, but it's pretty unlikely. He's 31. He's a catcher. He's played a lot of games and a lot of innings. And there are some indicators that are moving in the wrong direction, especially in terms of his batted ball profile, like you mentioned. Just to take a holistic view, his ex-WOBA was 329. That was his lowest since 2017, before he had really broken out. So, I don't know. I mean, he could very easily bounce back to 2019 numbers when he had 25 homers, 92 runs, 83 RBI, and 9 steals, and be a steal at this price. I mean, that would be a really, really valuable season. But if he's 17-13 with 137 combined runs and RBI again, like he was last season, he's definitely not going to be worth this price.
Yeah, last year he finished, I believe it was outside the top 110 in Roto. 113th overall for JT Realmuto. Scott, what do you think about him? The lowest cost that we've seen in a while now. The strikeout rate up there as well. So strikeouts adding up, ground ball rate. Last year, you remember he fractured his thumb in spring training and still was able to start the season on time. So, maybe it took him a little bit with that, but dealt with wrist, ankle, shoulder issues last year as well. What do you think about JT Realmuto in the 6th round?
Yeah, I think between the small signs of decline we've seen the past couple years and the new ball, the fact he's not a guy who hits the ball especially hard, I don't expect to see another season like he had in 2019. I mean, it seems like everybody had their career high in home runs in 2019, right? He hit 25. It was one of only 2 20-homer seasons he had. Salvador Perez hit basically 3 times as many home runs as Realmuto last year. So I do have him second. I do have him ahead of Will Smith because I am still counting on a playing time advantage, but I don't expect to have any of Realmuto this year, really. If I'm gonna pay up for a catcher, it's gonna be Perez.
All right, let's jump into Will Smith. We've mentioned him a few times already here. The ADP is 67. I realize that I was saying the 6th round for Realmuto. It's not correct. My math was off. So he's going in the late 5th round as of now in 12-team leagues. Will Smith is going in the middle of the 6th round and entering the prime of his career. He's 27 years old. He was actually second in Roto last year behind Salvador Perez, and he has finished top 3 in each of his first 3 seasons in fantasy points per game as well. So he stands out regardless of format. The plate discipline has been fantastic for Will Smith and has improved since when he was a rookie. It took a little bit of a step back compared to the shortened 2020, but still overall lots of walks and a good amount of contact for Will Smith in one of the best lineups, hitting in the middle of the Dodgers lineup as well here, Scotty. So what do you think about this cost? I mean, he's going about a round later than JT Realmuto. A lot of people excited about Will Smith. The question is, how much better can he actually get?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know that he can get that much better, but you just look at the OPS, compare it to other catchers. 860 was actually the lowest he's ever had. He's usually, he's been right in the mid 800s to around 900. And so, if you're anticipating more consistent playing time, I understand why you're excited about him. But again, I'm just not ready to go there until I see it implemented. I mean, the Dodgers have, we don't know what the final state of their roster is going to look like, obviously, but they're never wanting for bats. And so I have a hard time believing Will Smith is going to suddenly become this guy who starts 145, 150 games and has that much of a chance to improve on his totals. You'll be happy with him if you draft him, I think. But yeah, I'm not counting on him taking a step forward.
Chris, when I looked into Will Smith, what I noticed was that he was really consistent last year, an 831 OPS or better in 5 of 6 months. And I know that you are not into partial season statistics, so that's why I'll present this to you. Big second half, 266 batting average, 15 homers, a 936 OPS in 56 games in the second half for Will Smith. He hit the ball harder, leaned into fly balls, 51.7% fly ball rate. So look, if he could do something like that and maintain that, then we're talking about someone that can hit 30-plus home runs. It's just we haven't seen him do it yet. So we would be projecting him to do something that we haven't seen yet. What do you think about his cost in the 6th round for Will Smith?
It's fine. I think if you're going to pay up for one of the non-Salvador Perez catchers inside of the top 100, he's a better option than JT Realmuto.
You have him ranked second at the position?
Yes, I believe so.
Okay.
And yeah, I point out top 100 specifically because there is a guy I think is worth paying up who's just outside of the top 100. But yeah, I mean, Will Smith, he's at the age where a step forward wouldn't be unexpected. I think the increase in cost and the excitement about him is probably tied to the big second half, which I think is probably a mistake. But that's not to say there aren't a lot of reasons to be excited about him. I think there are. And I think you just look at his entire major league career for reasons to believe in him. It's just I don't necessarily think the big second half is indicative of anything more than a hot streak. The weird thing about him, though, is that he's been kind of a different type of player every year. And year is used loosely because he's, I don't think he had 200 plate appearances in a season before last year. But 2019, He was big pow. He was kind of an all or nothing power guy. 2020, he was this incredibly well-rounded player, 16% strikeout rate, 293 xBA. Last season, he found something in the middle. He was of right in the middle of everything in terms of where he was the first 2 seasons. So that's probably a decent indicator of what to expect.
And that's a good point, too, just that last year was basically the first full season we've seen from Will Smith. It's easy to, particularly for players with little track record, to put too much emphasis on that 2020 season, treat it like a full season in that case. But obviously it wasn't. And we did see that contact rate, especially. If memory serves, Will Smith's strikeout rate ballooned again in the playoffs of 2020 after being around 16% for the regular season. So I remember I was a little hesitant to be fully on board with him last year too, just because it seemed like we had so little information on him. But I feel comfortable now, saying like I don't really see any bust potential here. If if the arrow is pointing any direction, it's up. I just don't want to get ahead of myself with him. I don't think there's much reason to.
Yeah, and I think he's useful regardless of format. Roto, points leagues, but I mean, if you're talking about a points league where you want advantage in a one-catcher format, Will Smith is someone to target because of that fantastic plate discipline, over 3 fantasy points per game in each of his first 3 seasons. And the same could be said for our next catcher here, Yasmani Grandal, who has an ADP of 100.7, got off to an awful start last year in April. From May 1st on, he hit 268, 21 homers in 76 games, and he leaned all the way into this plate discipline, patient approach. I don't know if the White Sox were like, look, nobody else on this team can walk. We need you to walk, but that's what happened.
For everybody.
Career high 23% walk rate. That is unheard of. 21.9% strikeout rate, so more walks than strikeouts last year. It was crazy. And his home run to fly ball ratio was a career high and was actually backed up by StatCast. I mean, StatCast supports everything that Grandal did last year. So it's super weird. He's turning 33. He turned 33 years old in November, so he's older, but like he's also still really good and kind of getting better. I don't know. He's kind of just a weird player. Chris,
well,
go ahead, Scott. We'll start with you.
Well, you're kind of understating the weirdness here because on August 26th, he was batting 188. Remember, he got off to brutal. How many months was it? He played through July 5th with a bad knee, had surgery, missed about 7 weeks, came back on August 27th, got 4 hits, 2 home runs that day. And so over his final 30 games, he hit 337 with 9 home runs. Walked 27 times compared to 18 strikeout. Like it was like the best we've ever seen. Yasmani Grandal.
He played 30 of 33 games in that stretch as well.
He was unbelievable, and it redeemed his season stat line so that it was like a career season, but it was really just confined to that 30 game sample, basically.
Although it's worth saying, like the batting average was awful. He hit 188 through July 5th before he went on the IL. He was on a 36 homer, 98 RBI, 108 run pace. That's over 162 games. Obviously, catchers don't play that often, but he is, I believe, the only active catcher now that Buster Posey's retired, besides Salvador Perez, to have a 600 plate appearance season. He did that in 2019. And I mean, the underlying numbers largely back up what he did last season. I do think if there's a chance for someone to knock off Salvador Perez, I think Will Smith might have the best chance, but I think Yasmani Grandal's not that far off. You're probably not going to get a good batting average from him. That's always going to be the downside. But, I mean, he could be a huge playing time guy. He could be a 30 homer guy. And the run production numbers could be really good in that lineup if he gets to, 135 games, which is not out of the question.
It's just weird. Like, it's just like 32. He was 32 last year. It's reminiscent of Salvador Perez 2 years ago, right? Coming off surgery. Okay, but we know who this guy is, and Yasmani Grandal's case, an 825 OPS guy who'll walk a lot, have pretty good power. But not be this world beater that he was for those final 30 games. So I'm very skeptical of it.
Yeah.
And the thing is, like, if I thought he was going for a discount, I took Salvador Perez in a number of leagues last year because it seemed like people were basically giving him no hope of building off that breakout 2020. And I thought it was pretty unlikely, but the cost didn't seem that bad. Yasmani Grandal going 100th overall. If it was more like 120th, I think I could get behind it. But I that's a little.
I will just point out that 30 game sample size is only 7 games fewer than Salvador Perez's entire 2020 season.
I get it.
And Salvador Perez was going 78th last year for what it's worth.
He was going 78th on average. Okay, I got him. I know I got him much later than that in some leagues.
Yeah. Look, I don't think you should expect Yasmani Grandal to have the kind of power he did last season, or to, post a 940 OPS again. But he's shown the ability to be a significant difference-making catcher. which I think is the takeaway.
I'm about it, man. I'm about Yasmani Grandal. I think the price is fine. It's like right in that sweet spot where you don't have to pay up for someone like Will Smith. He's going 33 picks later than Will Smith, and then he's going a few spots ahead of the next names we'll talk about, Daulton Varsho and Willson Contreras. But it's that sweet spot. I don't think it's like an overpay, and he's good regardless of format too. I think he's even better in points leagues, 3.4 fantasy points per game last year for Grandal, but consistently, 240 to 250. If you play in a roto league, he's going to give you power. He's going to score runs. He's going to give you RBI. So he's fine. I think he's perfectly fine. The next one up, Daulton Varsho, who is an interesting player to talk about. 109 is the ADP. He turns 26 years old in July. So right there, entering the prime of his career, a really unique player. 37 starts at catcher last year, 36 starts in the outfield. If you combine his 2021 majors and minors numbers, he gives you 20 homers, 8 steals over 113 games. And that's part of his intrigue. The fact that he gives you power, he gives you speed. He should give you more playing time in the outfield. Scott, are you about it? Are you someone who actually buys in on Daulton Varsho, who's going just about 9 picks later than Yasmani Grandal?
It's certainly a little more boom or bust than like a Yasmani Grandal or Will Smith, where their downside is only so low. Varsho's downside is him getting sent back to the minors and being useless to you. But I think he's my choice. If anybody's going to unseat Salvador Perez, like I feel like Daulton Varsho's best case scenario could be that, because he has, when he's not catching, he's playing center field, right? Like he has that easy path to everyday at bats. And he's the only viable base stealer at the position. He's legitimately fast, obviously playing center field, and had some pretty good steals totals throughout his minor league career. And given the stage of development he's in, really just kicking off his major league career, I'm not so much looking at the full season stat line, the 246 batting average, the 755 OPS, because it was one of those tale of two seasons scenarios. In fact, if you combine like his 37 games from 2020, and then he played 38 to begin 2021, and during those combined 75 games, he hit 168. He was just utterly useless. But then from that point forward, the final 57 games of last year, he hit 294 with an 886 OPS, which for his minor league career, he hit 302 with an 899 OPS. It was very similar to the kind of hitter he was in the minors. And I think I'm hopeful things just clicked for him, and this is the start of the breakthrough that everybody was this is the start of him being the kind of player that people were hoping for when he first got called up in 2020, so he's got a little of that post type sleeper thing going on as well. Yeah, I like if I don't get Salvador Perez, the next catcher I'm looking at taking is Daulton Varsho if it's, beyond like round 10.
One thing is he needs to play more than he was last season. Because even from that, that 57 game sample size thing is what you said from July 20th. He started 50 of 66 games, which isn't terrible. That's
right.
A little more than 3/4, I believe, but it's not enough to, overcome the playing time edge that, Yasmani Grandal might have. Salvador Perez obviously will have. JT Realmuto probably will have. So that's the one place that he does need to take a step forward.
It's
80% of games for a catcher is very good. Like that's it was a 580 plate appearance pace.
And I was a little confused why they weren't playing him more, considering they're the Diamondbacks. You're not competing for anything. This guy's playing well. He's going to be a big part of your future, which is why I'm hopeful they'll play him more this year. But you're right. It needs to actually happen for him to live up to. I don't know that it necessarily needs to happen for him to live up to being the 5th catcher in fantasy, but for him to, compete with the Will Smiths in the world. And he does need to play more.
And I think he's the player you dream on at the position, right? Like that's Will Smith to a certain extent is that, but he's already sort of fully formed and he doesn't need to get better. Daulton Varsho is the guy that you look at and say, well, man, if he figures it out, we could be talking about the next great fantasy catcher.
I get the intrigue, the power, the speed, playing in the outfield. Theoretically should give you a ton of playing time. But Scott, I think the way that you first described him, boom or bust, is a perfect way to look at him. And I fall more so on the bust side than the boom. So at this cost, I mean, the fact that he's going just 10 picks after someone like Yasmani Grandal, who's much more proven, totally different skill sets. I understand that. The batted ball data was not good for for Daulton Varsho, even from June 20th on, when he returned and it basically got an opportunity to play, not every day, but pretty consistent for the Diamondbacks. Batted ball data was bad during that time. He still has options left. They have a prospect coming in Alec Thomas, who they could throw out there in the outfield. So I guess I'm looking more so at the glass half empty, but I understand why people are.
Yeah, it ultimately depends on what the price actually is. I get, the ADP is probably a little higher than I want to play, but there comes this drop off in talent basically across the board right around pick 120. I said, basically after round 10, I might look to draft him.
Right.
And it's hard to put too many specifics on it, but there just comes a point in the draft where I don't really know what to do with this pick. Oh, look, Varsho's still there, and I take Varsho.
Yeah, I've done that. I've done that too. And if you want to highlight one red flag that's really worrisome for him, and he had more infield fly balls than home runs last season. That's a really, really bad sign because infield fly balls are obviously just about the worst thing you can do as a hitter. Those aren't going to turn into anything. So the plate discipline's not great. The batted ball profile is not great. So he needs to get better as well. He's a boomer bust guy, but yeah, it's the upside's worth dreaming on, I think. I'm
curious how much the infield fly balls dropped once he got good. I'll look at that real quick.
So from June 20th on, again, that's when he returned and he got an opportunity to play. He hit 259 with an 802 OPS from that point forward. He had a 15% infield fly ball rate from June 20th on.
Yeah, it actually went up during
in the second half, it was slightly higher than the first half.
Fade Daulton Varsho. I'm telling everyone, you heard it here first. He's the industry darling right now. I'm out on Daulton Varsho. I'm not doing it. Let's take a quick break. When we return, I've got a few more players in ADP I want to talk about, sleepers, breakouts, and busts, and then we'll talk about that crop of second catchers that you can get later on in your drafts as well. We'll do that here on Fantasy Baseball Today. All right, so there's one veteran catcher we haven't talked about yet, and it is Willson Contreras with an ADP of 127.3. Kind of the forgotten catcher at this point, has consistently finished inside the top 9. It's a weird number, arbitrary number, but that's where he's been. He's been inside the top 9 for each of the past 3 seasons in both roto and head-to-head points. Last year, 237 batting average was a career low thanks to some BABIP issues, a career-high strikeout rate as well. Chris, Willson Contreras just strikes me as the safe catcher. I don't think there's a lot of upside. I think we know who he is. He hits too many ground balls. It's fine. He's going to hit 240 to 250 with 20 plus homers and a handful of steals, which is fine at the catcher position.
Yeah, he's played 7 seasons, and depending on how you break up his career, he had 3 really, really good seasons in his first 4, where he had an OPS of at least 845. That's really good for a catcher. The last 4 years, which overlaps 2 of those years, he's had an OPS below 780 in 3 out of the 4. Not bad, but much more along the lines of, yeah, he's a starting catcher you don't have to worry about than someone who's a real difference maker. 2019 being the one obvious outlier where he had an 888 OPS in 105 games, and if he had played a full season, almost certainly at that pace would have been higher than wherever he ended up finishing. But yeah, he definitely at this point feels like the boring safe guy that you just, if he's there at the right price and you don't love anyone else and you just all right, Willson Contreras, he's going to help me a little bit. He's not going to hurt me. And frankly, at catcher, a player who doesn't hurt you in roto, that's a big deal. I mean, most catchers, literally most of the catchers out of the 24 that are going to start in a 12-team league are going to hurt you more relative to the average player in lineups than they help you. And Willson Contreras probably won't.
Yeah. And this is the cutoff for me. If I play in a one catcher league, I really want one of these top 6 guys. We'll talk a little bit about Keibert, Ruiz, and Tyler Stephenson coming up. Ruiz is okay, but if I could get one of these top 6 catchers with Willson Contreras being that cutoff, I really want that to happen. In a 2-catcher league, I want one of these top 6 to be my first catcher if I can make that happen. So I'm about it. The one thing I'll point out, Scott, with the DH, hopefully coming to the National League, very small sample, but Contreras has 76 career plate appearances at designated hitter, 283 batting average, 954 OPS. So maybe it's something that could actually help him.
I mean, even if you go back and look at his good years that Chris was referring to, the advanced numbers didn't support what he was doing then. And I remember
he was running really high home run to fly ball rates, especially. I think he was like 20% plus in 3 of the first 4 years. Yep.
So no, I think who he was last year is really who he is, and that's a perfectly fine starter, but I wouldn't be counting on much more.
All right, let's dive into Tyler Stephenson versus Keibert Ruiz. They are going right next to each other right now in terms of ADP. It is Keibert Ruiz is going at pick 169.7, Tyler Stephenson 167.3. So going 2 picks apart right now. Tyler Stephenson, both of these guys, former top-ish prospects. I guess Keibert Ruiz technically still is a prospect. Tyler Stephenson is going to be the starter for the Cincinnati Reds. They traded Tucker Barnhart. He is the guy. And last year, he was solid. 286 batting average, 10 homers, 45 RBI, really strong plate discipline. And then Keibert Ruiz is still pretty young, 23 years old, has had some pretty big seasons in the minor leagues as well. Lots of contact, strong batting average. Trying to figure out where the power is at because he hit for a lot of power in the minors last year, but not necessarily at any other level. So, Scott, what do you think about these 2 catchers in particular? Keibert Ruiz versus Tyler Stephenson, and do you actually want to draft either of these guys as your first catcher?
I mean, if the price is right, basically, though, once we get past Daulton Varsho, I'll just take whatever comes to me at catcher. I'm not really looking to pay up for anybody. I have my preferences. I'm not saying necessarily I'm waiting until the very last pick to take a catcher. I might wait till second to last, third to last. It just depends who's there, what else I'm looking at. But it's not a high priority for me at all. That said, I definitely prefer Ruiz to Stephenson. Definitely. I think Ruiz's floor is very high. The fact that he did break through with 21 homers in the minors last year, and that was only in about a little over 300 plate appearances, a terrific home run pace in the minors. Okay, that opens my mind to potentially more upside than I thought he had, but I'm not even sure he needs to be this big power guy because you say he makes a lot of contact. He's freakishly good at making contact. Like he will contend for the lowest strikeout rate in all of baseball. Between his 2 stops, he played a little bit for the Dodgers, mostly with the Nationals, 9.4% strikeout rate. And, for most of his minor league career, he was right around there, like 10% strikeout guy. We think we're talking about how 20% is good for Will Smith, if you play a lot, I'm thinking a points league scenario, especially if you play a lot and you strike out that infrequently as a catcher, automatic top 10. Like that was Yadier Molina's whole career, basically. And then Molina had
Christian Vasquez.
Yeah, I mean, I
like
hope
the 4 years before 2021, he was really bad last year, but he was playing pretty regularly and hitting 276.
I don't think he was making quite that level of contact.
Not quite as much.
I think Ruiz can be better than Vasquez. And Molina had those couple years where he hit 20 plus homers. If Ruiz becomes a guy who can deliver 20 plus homers like he did in the minors last year, then he might be a top 3 type catcher. He might have a ceiling more like JT Realmuto, So yeah, I'm definitely if the draft's winding down in a 1 catcher league and Ruiz is still there, that's going to be a pick I'm sort of excited to make.
Yeah, it wouldn't surprise me one bit if we're talking about Keibert Ruiz going in a similar range to where Will Smith is going now. I don't think that the power will get there necessarily, but as much contact as he makes, guy, you mentioned 9 strikeouts in 29 games last year in the majors and a minor league track record to back that up. Yeah, I think he's going to hit for a good batting average. And even if it's only, 15 home runs. I think that that'll be enough for him to finish as a top 10 catcher, maybe even push towards the top 5. Chris, what do you think about these two, Tyler Stephenson versus Keibert Ruiz? And do you like either of them? They're going around that 14-15 round turn in a 12-team league.
I'm much more likely to just wait than take either one of them. I probably like Ruiz a little better, but yeah, I don't see either being like a special player. I don't think that's all that likely. I think it's more likely for Ruiz because he does have that one standout hit tool. Tyler Stephenson, I don't really see much to be interested in at all. I mean, I guess it's catcher, so if you're competent. But he strikes me as the kind of guy who the most likely outcome is he's not helping your team all that much. Relative to other catchers, he might be fine, but like I think he's probably, I don't know, a 12 to 14 homer guy who hits 260, and those are a dime a dozen at catcher. His minor league track record, not all that impressive, although he was pretty young throughout his minor league career, so he has that going for him. So I don't want to write off the possibility of improvement, but I don't really see it with Tyler Stephenson. I don't think there's all that much special about him.
Yeah, I think a lot of people are projecting why he's going 7th among catchers on average is people are just looking at last season's slash line. He had 286, OPS near 800, and they're projecting that out with full-time at bats now that Tucker Barnhart is with the Tigers. But I mean, 34% average exit velocity was 34th percentile for Tyler Stephenson. His expected batting average was 257. His expected slug was only 391. He just doesn't impact the ball that hard. Mm-hmm. And, there have been guys who consistently outperform that.
Willson Contreras.
But I think over the small sample we've seen from Tyler Stephenson, I'm not ready to say he's going to be one of those guys, especially since, we don't have a long history of it with the ball playing the way it does now either. So, yeah, if he was like the number 10 catcher, maybe I could hype him as a breakout. But as the number 7 going as early as he is, I just think I see nothing but downside.
Yeah, don't fall for the appearance. 6'4", 225 pounds. This is a big guy that we're talking about, but the in-game power just hasn't been there for his brief major league career and his entire minor league career. He hasn't really hit for much in-game power, so keep that in mind. He hit way too many ground balls last year too, near 50% ground ball rate for Tyler Stephenson. Before we get to sleepers, breakouts, and busts at the position, I want to thank everybody for watching us live here on YouTube right now. Make sure to like this video if you haven't already and subscribe to the channel, youtube.com/fantasybaseballtoday. Tap that notification bell so every time we go live, which is usually around 10 p.m. Eastern time on weeknights, unless it's a mock draft live stream that we're doing. We typically do those around 8 p.m. Eastern time. So make sure to subscribe to the channel. Let's start with sleepers here, Scotty, and let's try to move through these kind of quickly so we can get to a little bit more ADP. Who you got?
Okay, my sleeper at catcher is, it seems like he's a forgotten man, Mitch Garver, who is going off the board. Let's see here. 231st on average. And this is a guy who last year had a higher OPS than even Salvador Perez. It was right in between. Yasmani Grandal actually had the highest OPS, right? And right behind him was Mitch Garver at 875. Now, the season was interrupted a couple times by injury, so the sample wasn't what you like it to see. But remember, in 2019, also, he was a 991 OPS. He was far and away the best catcher in fantasy on a per game basis. He looked like the next huge thing coming at the position. And in between was the 2020 season where he's also injured a lot. I think he struck out at like a 40% rate, and everybody kind of was like, okay, that 2019 season, clearly nothing to see here. So, in between the injuries last year, it seemed like Garver showed he wasn't just a one-hit wonder. And that kind of upside at this position, there are playing time concerns. I get it. There are health concerns. I get it. But there are so few catchers capable of delivering that kind of power production combined with those kinds of on-base skills that if things break right for him, if he's able to play even 2/3 of the time, which he should, frankly, because I mean the Twins, their lineup isn't what it was a couple years ago, then he could deliver big things, and the cost is virtually nothing. So Mitch Garver, if you want upside for a next to nothing price, I think he clearly stands out as the guy.
Yeah, the ADP for Mitch Garver, 238.3, so you can get him very late in your drafts. I like him regardless of format. Roto, head-to-head points, he averaged 2.5 fantasy points per game last season. That was tied for 7th at the position. He just has to stay on the field. That's the biggest issue for Mitch Garver the past couple of years, but puts the ball in the air and really hits the ball hard. A 17% barrel rate, second at the position to only Mike Zunino. That was better than Salvador Perez as well. Chris, who do you have as a sleeper here at the catcher position?
Yeah, just a spoiler alert. Mitch Garver is my breakout at the position, so I'm fine with it. Anytime the minimum, the worst thing you can say about a player is he just has to stay healthy, I'm going to like them.
Fair enough.
Joey Bart is my sleeper at catcher. He is the Giants' top prospect who we had been really waiting for him since 2019. He got a chance in 2020 and really flopped. Struck out like 35% of the time. He was really bad. Barely got an opportunity last year in the majors, but we're still talking about a guy who's actually slightly younger than Tyler Stephenson. He's 25. Feels like he's been around for a while. And he's a career 287 hitter with an 860 OPS in the minors. In the high minors, he has 14 home runs in 89 games. He's hit over 300 in those games. Plate discipline, or really strikeout rate, has been an issue for him in the upper minors. That obviously derailed him in 2020. Maybe it'll be an issue for him moving forward. But if I'm going to take a late round bet on a young catcher, I think Joey Bart is exactly the kind of guy I want to do that with, because he's still a top 75 consensus prospect, and he's been as high as a top 30 consensus prospect. So I love betting on him. There's a potential for a 270 average with 20 homers from Joey Barton. The Giants seem to have earned the benefit of the doubt when it comes to getting the most out of players lately.
I think what you're hearing here with Chris's pick and my pick, and this is kind of just overall catcher strategy, is you get to a point in the catcher rankings and basically everybody, you're looking at a Yan Gomes type season, 240 batting average, 15 homers. That's just like the default catcher season. That's what you're seeing for that's what I basically see for Tyler Stephenson. So it's kind of weird to me that he's being elevated. What you want to find are the few catchers in that giant clump of Yan Gomes seasons who could potentially do something more. And I think Mitch Garver clearly fits the bill. Joey Bart, just because of, his pedigree and some of what he's done in the minors, fits the bill too.
All right, so maybe my sleeper is more of like a Yan Gomes type. I don't know. I'll let you guys decide on that. And it is Elias Diaz with the Colorado Rockies. Last year, I know there was some hype around Dom Nunez potentially being the starter for the Rockies. He basically fell flat on his face. But Elias Diaz, he was good. 246 batting average, 18 home runs, kind of Yan Gomes-esque, but 774 OPS, strong contact rate, 16%. Strikeout rate last year for Diaz, puts the ball in play, going to be the starter in Coors Field. And I mean, for what it's worth, he got better as the season went on. So June 1st on, 283 batting average, 17 homers, and 897 OPS for the final 4 months of the season. I wouldn't expect something like that from Diaz, but as much contact as he makes playing in Coors Field, I think there's some power there. I wouldn't rule out the possibility of like a 260, 270 batting average, maybe like 18 to 20 home run season for Diaz. And if he does that, he's probably a top 10 catcher.
That's like the trifecta of, like, if I'm going to be the last person to draft a catcher in this one catcher league, those are the three I'm looking at, basically Garver, Diaz, and Bart. And there's one more, particularly in a roto league, in particular if you're talking two catcher context. I think he's the riskiest of the bunch, but just the kind of power production he provided last year. I'm blanking on the name. Eric Haas of the Tigers, who is one of those, he's either going to strike out or homer guys, and there's a good chance he strikes out too much to keep the job. But he might be somebody who hits 25 homers at the position, even with just a part-time role.
I suppose before we move on, we should probably mention Adley Rutschman, just because I don't know if he's going to get mentioned in any of the other categories. Not really a sleeper where he's going, but he's the top catcher prospect in baseball. One of the top, arguably the top prospect in baseball. He is for Baseball America. Hit 285 with an 899 OPS in AA, AAA last season, and basically his first real taste of professional baseball. Was it the number one pick in the 2019 draft?
Yes.
Yes, and it's his birthday. Happy birthday to 24-year-old Adley Rutschman today. I know Frank has that in the notes as well. But, since we're kind of running up against it, I wanted to make sure we mention, if you're talking about upside and you're talking about guys who could potentially be a difference maker, if he does get the call up early, it's real hard to find a flaw in what he did last season. Strikeout rate below 20% in the high minors. He was awesome.
Yeah, the plate discipline in particular was just insane for him. 79 walks to 90 strikeouts over 123 games in the minors. It's just a matter of when does he get to the majors, Scott? And you have to ask yourself that, because the ADP for Rutschman is he's the 9th catcher off the board.
Yeah.
The price isn't prohibitive relative to the position, 175.3, but he's still being drafted as a top 10 catcher. So if you're, what format do you draft him in? A one catcher league? And then just take like a Elias Diaz later on and start him until Rutschman comes up? Like, how do you go about it?
I'm very surprised he's the 9th catcher going off the board, because, is anybody counting on him? Is anybody counting on him being on the roster opening day? I guess it's possible, but this is the Orioles. Why would they do that unless there's some, in the new agreement, there's some major change in the way service time is handled?
Which it seems like there will be.
Well, we'll
at
see.
least some kind of change.
But it's really hard to roster a second catcher, especially early in the year when those roster spots are so precious. Devoting a bench spot to a catcher who, even if Adley Rutschman does come up and is great, it's just, how much is he going to play? You wonder about what kind of real impact he'll have. I just don't know from a roster construction standpoint that it makes sense. I could see drafting him as your number 2 catcher in a 2-catcher league, but basically you have to be willing to draft him anywhere where you're willing to take a 0 at catcher sometimes, because the roster, the way you manage your roster is just going to require it. Either that, or you're going to let some stuff go on the waiver wire that you otherwise would capitalize on. I almost picked him as my bust, actually, just because of where he's going.
The good news is there has never been a highly rated collegiate catcher drafted by the Baltimore Orioles early in the first round with great places discipline who disappointed us.
I can't tell you how many times I've accidentally called Adley Rutschman Matt Wieters, which is not a good omen. Like, that's just where big Orioles catcher prospect, Matt Wieters.
Oh, man.
The profiles are like strikingly similar.
Oh, man. Don't put that evil on poor Adley Rutschman. The projection systems all on Fangraphs have Rutschman for either 102 or 103 games. So I set the over-under at 102.5. Chris, you would take the blank.
102.5 is a really good number, because if they keep the service time thing, he probably wouldn't get called up until May or June.
Yeah.
I would probably take the over, just because I'm betting there's going to be some kind of significant change that incentivizes teams to call their top prospects up earlier.
All right. Scott, what do you think? 102.
I'll take the under. I'll take the under. And partly because he's a catcher. And they tend to sit a lot.
All right. I'm with you. I would take the under there as well when it comes to Adley Rutschman. For breakouts, Chris mentioned he has Mitch Garver. Scott, you have Daulton Varsho. We spoke about all these players already. Keibert Ruiz, I didn't really add much on him myself, but I just love the fact that he makes as much contact as he does. And if he taps into that power potential he showed in the minors last year, then we're talking about someone who's pushing 20 home runs with like a 270 plus batting average. And as a catcher, that would constitute a breakout. So Keibert Ruiz for me, and then Bus. Scott, Chris, you guys have Tyler Stephenson. I talked about Daulton Varsho. Anything else that you guys wanted to add to Tyler Stephenson before we quickly run through some more ADP?
I just don't think the upside is worth the risk. That's what it comes down to. Is I don't think the best case scenario, even if he did what he did last season, who cares?
Yeah. I think he'll be a fine starter in fantasy, but is he going to be better than Elias Diaz? I don't know. I think there's a better chance Diaz outperforms him, frankly.
It's a bet on what was likely an unsustainable batting average last season, honestly, is what I think it is.
And Tyler Stephenson's ADP again is 167.3. Elias Diaz is 276.7. So quite a difference in draft cost between those two. This is the first position preview we're doing of the offseason. So bear with us. We're going to run a little bit long here.
Position previews always run long.
we've got a lot of position previews to perfect this art over the next couple of weeks. ADP review, third round of a 12-team league. We mentioned Salvador Perez going at pick 33. In the fifth round, JT Realmuto, 57.7. Sixth round, Will Smith at pick 67. Then you see a 30-pick drop, so a tier drop here. And then in the ninth round, Yasmani Grandal at pick 100.7. At the 9-10 turn, you see Daulton Varsho. In the 11th round, Willson Contreras at 127.3. Another tier drop. 40 picks or so later, round 14-15 turn, that's where you see Tyler Stephenson, 167.3, and Keibert Ruiz, 169.3. 1 round later, Adley Rutschman, 175.3 is the ADP. We just spoke about him. And then after Adley Rutschman, we see a 45-pick drop, so another huge gap. The 10th catcher off the board, Gary Sanchez. It took us an hour to get to Gary Sanchez, but I guess that tells you everything you need to know about Gary Sanchez at this point in time. The ADP is 220. He's going off the board in the 19th round. Chris, he still finished as a top 12 catcher in both formats last year, but he did so with a 204 batting average and 23 home runs. So, I mean, you know who he is. He's going to completely tank your batting average, but he'll give you power. That's Gary Sanchez.
Yeah, I mean, he might be like the new Mike Zunino, where you're hoping for like that outlier home run season. And Gary, he's not even that young anymore. He's 29. God, can't believe he's that old. He still crushes the ball.
He's so frustrating though. Like I had him last year in fantasy. He had an okay May, 776 OPS. He had an awesome June, 1035 OPS, 639 OPS or less in each of the other 4 months. Yeah. That's a borderline unusable catcher for fantasy. Even a second catcher, that's really, really bad. 639 OPS.
Yeah,
that is awful.
He lost his job
too much
at least once, right? And I keep expecting the Yankees to non-tender him, and they keep not. Which I don't know. Maybe that said something, but no, it's funny. Chris said he's become like another Mike Zunino. I was gonna say for when we talked about Zunino that he's become like a better version of Gary Sanchez.
That's exactly right. You're right about that. Like Mike Zunino last year is who we wanted Gary Sanchez to be. I mean, as bad as the batting average was, 33 home runs at the position, that is a standout. And that's exactly what Mike Zunino did last year. Worth
pointing out that in 2019, he did hit, it was only 232, but that's a lot better than 204 with 34 homers in 106 games. So
I know, but that's a long time ago.
It is, but it's not that many games ago.
Since the start of 2018, Gary Sanchez is batting 201.
Yeah, no, he's had 3 really, really bad seasons in there. It's really just you're hanging on to 2019 and 2017 as the hopes.
No, the thing is, it's bad, but it's also fine. If that makes sense, right? Like if you want to wait till the last round in a one catcher league, Gary Sanchez is fine.
Yeah,
like he's going to out homer most catchers probably.
Yeah. But again, like as bad as he was, 11th in roto at the position, 2.3 fantasy points per game last year.
Didn't play a ton.
So that's Gary Sanchez. Let's move on here. We have 5 catchers going between rounds 20 and 22. So I'm going to lump these guys together. You guys can quickly run through each or just give me your favorite among this group. Christian Vasquez at ADP 234. Mitch Garver, who we spoke about, 238 is the ADP. Travis d'Arnaud at pick 242. Mike Zunino at pick 248. Sean Murphy at pick 256. Scott, we've done a few drafts together, and I feel like you wind up with Mike Zunino.
Yeah.
I don't know. And at least one of them, maybe 2 drafts that we've done.
Where do I have him ranked? I have him ranked a lot higher than this. I have him 8th. I have him just behind Keibert Ruiz. I have him ahead of Tyler Stephenson, actually. And I have Gary Sanchez 9th. So I kind of coupled those two together. Like, nobody hit a home run more frequently last year than Mike Zunino at any position. He was the most frequent home run hitter. He hits the ball extremely hard. He doesn't hit it enough. And I'd like to see him play more than 2/3 of the time. But getting a nice chunk of home runs from a catcher spot doesn't set like my expectations for the position are so low that seems like, well, whatever. I'll take that. I don't know that he's going to hit 33 again, but if he hits 26, that's going to make him one of the top 3 or 4 home run hittingest catchers.
26 would be the second most of his career.
Yeah. Mike Zunino, look, he hit 33 homers last year. It was second to only Salvador Perez at the position.
That's all he did.
860 OPS, tied for third with Will Smith. So he did stuff last year. He did some stuff. But
no, he literally just hit home runs. Like let's be honest. He didn't do stuff. He hit 33 home runs. That is all Mike Zunino did.
He scared the crap out of me. That's what honestly, Chris.
He had 39 non-home run hits.
Oh, geez.
He had
that's bad.
29 non-home run RBI. That's not including it's probably lower because there were presumably runners on base for some of those. Mm-hmm. But 33 of his 62 RBI and 33 of his 64 runs were just him hitting a home run and driving himself in and crossing the plate. If he hits 25 home runs next season, I mean, you're probably looking at 45 runs in RBI and a sub 200 batting average, which is what he did the previous 3 seasons.
Catcher
right. No, but we should contextualize because the previous 3 seasons for Mike Zunino, he hit 182 with a 615 OPS, and his per 162 game pace was 23 home runs. He hit 33 home runs in 231 games in the previous 3 seasons combined before last season.
And it's
I want zero part of Mike Zunino.
And it's probably one of those situations where if he gets off to a lousy start, okay, I just drop him and pick up Yan Gomes or whatever, But if he hits 9 home runs in April, okay, good for me.
Yeah, he hits 9 home runs in April.
Yeah,
I love that. I love that Yan Gomes became the focal point of this podcast.
The thing is, it doesn't even work anymore because now he's backing up Willson Contreras. But you know what Yan Gomes has been.
He's kind of a platonic ideal of the 54 RBI, 20 home run catcher.
Chris, I'm with you, man. Mike Zunino, I have him ranked quite a bit lower than Scott does. I have him down at 13th. He's part of that group. It's like Zunino, Gary Sanchez, Sean Murphy. They're all kind of going to do the same thing, but I expect Zunino, I guess, to be the best at doing that one thing, which is hitting home runs.
He'll either be the best or the worst.
Yeah. He was on the good side of variance last year. That's basically the biggest point to make about him. I'll quickly run through each of these. Christian Vasquez seems like he was hurt by the ball last year. Mm-hmm. His power came way, way, way down. If you do play in Roto, however, as a second catcher, he has 27 steals since the start of 2017. That's second to only JT Realmuto. So he does contribute something there. Travis d'Arnaud. I dove into the numbers. I thought that I was going to like Travis d'Arnaud a little bit more. Not really excited about it. He's always hurt. The batted ball data was awful last year. The ground ball rate spiked, and it seems like the shortened 2020 was a standout outlier season for Travis d'Arnaud. He's fine as a second catcher, but I don't know.
I mean, if he does what he did in 2019, he's going to be a pretty good value.
He's going at pick 242, so you can get him as your second catcher pretty comfortably. Sean Murphy was the other one I wanted to mention. Again, he's fine. 216, 17 home runs. Based on StatCast, he actually underperformed his numbers. He had a 240 XBA, so I would expect the batting average to bounce back quite a bit here for one Sean Murphy. Still not going to be good, though, in that department. The next group of 5 catchers are going between rounds 22 and 24. Eric Haas at pick 263. Omar Narvaez, 274. Alejandro Kirk, 276. Elias Diaz, 276, and then Joey Bart, 288. So a few of our sleepers here. Elias Diaz for me, Joey Bart for Chris, down in this range. Chris, is there anyone else outside of those two, Haas, Narvaez, Kirk, maybe that you're interested in this tier, in this group?
I think Narvaez is okay. I think, Kirk, it's mostly a question of playing time, but
trade him. The
Blue Jays
very exciting.
The Blue Jays have just been churning out these catcher prospects who look great in the minors.
Yep.
I can't remember the guy, the top catcher prospect now.
Gabriel Moreno.
Who
could be up at some point this year.
Yeah. And before him, it was Danny Jansen, who had amazing minor league numbers. Mm-hmm. And so it's kind of just where does Alejandro Kirk fit?
Kirk crushes the ball and he strikes out. His strikeout rate's about like Keibert Ruiz is actually.
Yep.
So like,
That was
find
that
a
was
place
what was
for this
so,
guy to play. I don't care if it's actually catcher.
Yeah.
Yeah, the only reason he's going this low is because of the questions of the playing time. Personally, I'd take him ahead of Wieters because at least he's going to have a job to begin the year.
Rutschman.
You just called him
There you go.
Wieters,
I just did it. I just did it, didn't I? Ahead of Rutschman, yes.
All right. It took us 70 minutes, but you finally got there, Scott. We call it Adley Rutschman, Matt Wieters. Omar Narvaez. Again, he's fine. Like, doesn't hurt you. 266, 11 home runs. He did tank in the second half. They brought in Pedro Severino. Seems like those guys are pretty clearly going to be a platoon tandem. But yeah, Narvaez, I've already picked him up in a few 2-catcher leagues as my second catcher. He's fine. Picks 300 and beyond. Yadier Molina, Carson Kelly, Max Stassi, Danny Jansen, and James McCann. Scott, anyone here if you're waiting real late in your drafts as a second catcher?
I mean, Carson Kelly's pretty bad against righties, so maybe he loses at bats to Varsho, but his overall numbers always look strong. Yadier Molina is still an everyday catcher. I have no qualms making him my number 2 catcher in a 2-catcher league. I mean, these are the kinds of guys that you can drop Zunino for, later on in the year when it's not going the way you like, or whoever else.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Yadier Molina last year, it's kind of gross, but 252 batting average, 11 homers, 66 RBI, 3 steals. It's fine. I mean, again, like he's kind of like Omar Narvaez, and that he doesn't hurt you, and he doesn't
and he plays a lot.
Yeah, that he does. Max Stassi, big power, can stay healthy, but I do like him if you are waiting this late as well. James McCann, someone we had ranked as a top 12 catcher last year. Mm-hmm. He tanked. He was not good, but he should still be the starter and play most of the time for the Mets. So
I think Austin Nola is being overlooked.
Yeah, Austin Nola is going even beyond this group here. The problem is, Chris, that the Padres have 3 catchers on what is expected to be their active roster. Nola, Victor Caratini, and Jorge Alfaro, who they traded for with the Marlins. I mean, he could play a little outfield as well.
And they have a big catcher prospect who's basically ready, Luis Capusano.
Yeah. So that's the problem there. Like, I think Nola could be fine, but it's just like, what does the playing time look like? Yeah. So there's some question marks there. Some other starters that may intrigue you in deeper leagues. Jacob Stallings is now starting with the Miami Marlins. Tucker Barnhart should get some playing time with the Tigers in a tandem with Eric Haas. Luis Torrens gets some playing time with the Mariners. He was solid last year for a decent amount of time as well. Scott, 3 prospects I want to quickly mention before we wrap up here. MJ Melendez, who we talked about a little bit with the Royals, 288 batting average last year, 41 home runs in the minors. Gabriel Moreno with the Toronto Blue Jays, 367 batting average, 8 home runs over 37 games. And then the aforementioned Luis Campusano. Can you see any of these guys making an impact this year in fantasy?
Oh, yeah. They all could. I mean, it just depends if they get the opportunity, but they're all on the verge of being major league ready. We've already seen Campusano in the majors the past 2 years. I want to mention this for Melendez. 41 home runs last year led the minors. So a catcher led both the majors and minors in home runs, and they're both in the Royals organization.
He did it in 123 games.
That's pretty awesome too.
Yep.
I saw a video of him. He was part of some kind of home run derby, and this guy was tanking home runs, like seriously unlimited power. So I'm very interested to see what the Royals do here, because they've got a good problem on their hands. They've got Salvi, they've got Melendez, they got Vinny Pasquantino, they have Nick Prado, they have Bobby Witt, they have all these young players coming up together, and they got to figure out how to make it work. But again, good problem to have for the Kansas City Royals. We're going to wrap there. Sorry for going so long, but we'll be better with these position previews.
Don't ever apologize.
I know, right? It's like, hey, we're just
position previews.
Right? Let's do it. For Scott and Chris, I am Frank. Thank you all for listening and watching Fantasy Baseball today. We'll be back again tomorrow with First Base. Bye-bye.